Go.
All right, today's class, as you probably know from the videos and the readings, is about anthropology and how it approaches gifts. Not only our own Western idea of what a gift is, but also in a more etic, outside of culture view of gifts in general, and also the view of the gift from the viewpoint of other cultures, which would be an emic perspective. Now, two of our videos focused on comparing and contrasting the Western view of what a gift is with some other cultures' views of what a gift is. Starting from the first one, from the, if you remember, the Australian speaker. What was his view of what Westerners generally believe a gift is? And you can use your dictionaries if you wish.
It's a gift that's given formally.
Yes. All right, it's a gift that is given, especially in a formal context, though not always. Rather, it is a thing that is given. That's what a gift is. Generally, it's assumed from our Western perspective that it's given out of affection or generosity. Basically, the gift is given because it's good to give the gift, not necessarily because there's any assumption of expectations that go with the gift. At least this is the idealized Western version. Likewise, it's generally assumed to be without any reciprocal obligations. A gift is given, as the saying goes, no strings attached. But our first video presenter, Harriman, had a certain thing to say about our view of the gift. And he admitted when he said this, he was working mostly from a writer by the name of Mouse, who I realize you have not read, but he did summarize him pretty well. What was essentially his view of the gift? No idea?
Don't remember.
Oh, let me back up really quick. Basically what he said, before I get on to our warning, what he said was, essentially our view of the gift is sort of a lie we tell ourselves, and that in reality all gifts have some sort of reciprocal obligation or entanglement between the giver and the gift receiver. So he expressed a rather dim view of this Western view of what the gift is. And before you go out into the streets and tell everyone they're wrong, let me verbatim recite my standard boilerplate warning. The point of anthropology is not to go out into the world and tell people that their cultural understandings are wrong or that you have the truth. Nor is it to be used as something to prop up a sense of superiority that justifies mistreating people. So I appreciate his understanding that we're all telling ourselves a lie, but if you go out from this class into the university and tell everybody they're delusional, may the ghost of Franz Boas have mercy upon you. All right, anthropology has a different definition of a gift, and this is also from Harriman. Take out his whole "we're deceiving ourselves" line and take out that one part of his definition. What was the rest of the definition of a gift as he claimed anthropology saw it?
An exchange?
Well, yes, in as much as it's redistribution. It's a thing redistributed from person to person, group to group, or from groups to person, persons to group, any way you want to divide that up. Additionally, where couldn't a gift occur in his view? As he says, as anthropology views it, where doesn't a gift occur? Do you have a guess?
doesn't occur during fighting?
Well, that's actually possibly true, although we'll see an example coming up where the gift giving is the fighting. Actually, it must occur outside of a market situation or a quid pro quo capitalist exchange. Additionally, what might the gift include in as much as expectations? I'm giving you a little hint there.
Expectation is getting something back.
Based on the culture, there are bound to be a lot of culturally specified expectations, which might include that it establishes a personal relationship between the individuals, tests their trustworthiness, leads to status gain by either the gift giver or the gift receiver, maybe both, or that there might actually be, as you said, reciprocal obligations now between those two individuals. Though you might have received a gift, it didn't come with no strings attached. It might have had, based on the culture, a few strings attached. Maybe next year you have to give a gift back. And we'll see that in a few of the examples coming up. Now, this is going to the Milbank video, where he explains why, in a way, the Western definition, the Western view of gift giving is so different. Basically, his assertion was that Western notions of the gift stem from the cultural influence of Christianity on Europe, and also Judaism to a certain extent. That prior to that, if you were, say, two Gallic chieftains exchanging gifts, your concept of what the gift was would have been very different from the modern European mindset-informed view of the gift we generally in the Western world have today. So, before I ruin the surprise here, does anybody have any ideas of like what some of those sources might have been exactly, those influences on European thought? Yes, actually my first example is a quote from the Bible. His assertion is essentially that when a certain construct, this one theological, is taught time and time again, week after week, Sunday after Sunday, for over 1.5 millennia, it sinks in. And it probably helps establish the Western view of the gift. So one of the examples that you might go to is directly from the Bible, as you said. When you give alms, don't let your left hand know what the right hand does. Here is a direct instruction not to expect something back when you give something away. You give something away for the good of giving it away. And that's why the term alms is used. It's charity in a way. You do it out of goodwill or for the general good, not because you expect something back. Now that influence for hundreds of years, over 1,500 years, how Western Europe viewed the gift. And additionally, the general, and this is something deeper he goes into, the deeper view of a monotheistic religion with an omnipotent single exemplar of what it is to give a gift has implications as well. Because if the exemplar of gift giving is all-powerful and needs nothing, there's nothing you can reciprocate back. There's no influence you can gain by giving back. So this also changed the entire European concept of what a gift was. In many ways, Milbank and Mouse would argue, to the contrary of the way the rest of the world understands a gift, or most of the rest of the world. So, this is Harriman, goes through a few cultures when he's giving examples, and he uses both emic and etic perspectives on their traditions of gift giving. Anybody remember what emic is?
Outside perspective? Outside perspective?
Actually, reverse that.
It's inside.
Emic is the inside perspective, correct, of the culture. How they view what they're doing. Their own, I guess, mental schema, if you will, how they understand it. Whereas the etic one is the outsider's perspective. This might be the anthropologist, it might be from another culture's viewpoint, however it goes. Now, he started with an etic perspective, and being Herman's coming from Oceania, all of his examples are Pacific Islanders, so we just have to accept that that's all he talks about. His first one is the Trobrianders, and this one is probably not the Kula cult, not the one you also read in your readings. This is the inland islander to fishermen and back exchanges. He basically addresses this in a very functional terms. He says that their gifts essentially establish nutritional benefits, that the people inland, the farmers who grow tubers, give gifts of these excess crops to the fishermen, and in turn, when they get their catches, the fishermen move animal protein, that is fish, inland as gifts to the farmers. Now, while they might view this in any number of ways, and he does go into that a bit, what he really focuses on is the usefulness of this gift exchange. However, in the next two examples, he goes on to talk about the gifts of other cultures from their internal perspective. And this is a lot of what we're going to deal with from this point on in the lecture. So what's the inside perspective? Anybody? Emic.
Emic.
What was it?
Emic.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's go to the Maori, how, and the spirit in the gift. Does anybody remember what he said about this?
That they gave gifts to appease the spirits, and they passed on that gift, so that way the spirits don't get angry.
Not necessarily that they're angry, but everything else was exactly correct. There's a spirit that comes from the person who gives the gift that's entangled with the gift and goes to the person receiving it. And the reason that there's reciprocation of these gifts is because if there weren't, there would be misfortune, ill effects of this spirit that you're keeping from another person. And the only way to give that spirit back to that person is to give them a gift as well. But I should note, this isn't a pure capitalist or market exchange. They're not actually measuring exactly how much they're worth. The point is that they give gifts, not that they're engaging in some immediate on-the-spot exchange. It's very long-term, and it's a lot more nebulous in terms of value. In the Javanese Slamatan case, what was the internal, the emic perspective of that culture on gift exchanges there? Does anybody remember that one? Sort of similar. Essentially, they felt that, and this was in a much more formal setting. They were actually doing their gift exchanges in formal feasts. And essentially, their view was that the spirits and their neighbors all joined in the feast when they feasted together, and they gave gifts of food to their neighbors in these communal feasts. And that would bring balance and stave off the unwanted attention or the misfortune that could be brought by unquiet or imbalanced spirits, which they call slamet. So, from here we're going to go on to the other cultures and their understandings of the gift in a few different contexts. But first we're going to do a small exercise. So let's get to that. You'll be breaking down into your groups of three. One person in each of the groups of three doesn't have an envelope, but two of the other ones already have their envelopes at this point. So there are some rules to this exercise. You'll break into your three-person groups. The two of you with envelopes have some rules in your envelopes. And these are the rules you must follow as you try to exchange gifts with one another. Doesn't matter what the gifts are. Could be pencils, I don't care. But each of you have to follow your own individual set of rules, which you'll find inside your envelopes. You cannot reveal what your rules are, but you can otherwise negotiate as you see fit, and if that gives away what the particular rules you're following with regards to gifts exchange are, that's fine. The third person in each group is a negotiator between the two. Your job is, to the best of your ability, try to get to a meeting of the minds between these two gifters. But also take some notes, because I'm going to be asking some questions about what were the concepts of the gift that these two people were trying to enact in their gift exchange. And when we're done with the exercise, we'll see how everyone did. And then we'll go on to actually some of the examples, which are actually what your cards are based on, your rules are based on. All right, go ahead. Then we do an exercise. Then we're done the exercise. So the first question I would ask the people here, the third person from each of the groups, was what the first gifter was really after, and what was his or her conceptualization of the gift. And the reverse of that, what was the second person's as well. And finally, what value could that individual, and this is totally opinion-based, but what value could that individual see in trying to understand the emic understandings of another culture with regards to the gift? With that finished, we're moving on to some of the examples and their specific contexts from the Kronk reading. So there are a few examples in there, and we're going to cover a decent amount of them and go over some of the attributes of those gift-giving systems and those conceptualizations of the gift in particular contexts. I'm going to try to keep it focused on just a few things, not the whole gift-giving concept that that culture might have. So the first one we're going to do is the Kwakiutl potlatch, or potluck, where we got that word, where they see the gift as part of sort of a competition, or peaceful fighting is the word, or the words that Boas used at one point. So my question here would be, based on your reading of the potlatch, need a gift, and here we're again playing off of the Western view of the gift, need a gift be meant in goodwill or without self-interest?
Because it's formed in a peaceful fighting, so they're expecting to get gifts back, but they're also trying to make it to where they can outgive the person that they are peaceful fighting with.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So the extravagant gifts in this case are to win, essentially, in a social sense, without actually resorting to violence. They're attempting to flatten, that is, shame and undermine an opposing chieftain by out-gifting him, by giving more gifts to the people and proving they're more generous. And so they might be giving away, but what is it doing for the person who gives things away?
It makes them appear to be better.
Yeah, it's a self-aggrandizement. They might be giving things away, but they're gaining a whole host of social benefits from appearing to be so generous, right? It's making them a bigger person or a bigger man in their society. So if and I'm kind of giving it away here, I know with this bullet, but if the potlatch, if this competitive feasting and gift-giving is peaceful fighting, what is the gift then in this case?
Food?
Well, I mean, what in using the terms of a fight, what's the gift then in a fight?
The weapon.
It's a weapon, exactly. Basically, the gifts are weapons. Peaceful ones, but they're weapons in a competition, or they're props for the competition. All right. Well, I'm actually going to play a little, and Kronk actually focused on this more than anything. I'm going to play a little with the whole Western view of what a gift is, because this is a Western example. Do all subgroups in a single society always understand the gift in the same way?
No.
And can you come up with an example from the reading, maybe?
The U.S. government?
Yeah, the federal government of the United States. And furthermore, do the representations about their gift giving There are aid, grants, and largesse, as the term was used. Are they always true?
No.
No.
So, the federal government's official view of grants and aid, whether that's grants to educational institutions, foreign aid to other governments, just general giving away of money, which they call their largesse, is that they're just giving it away for the good of humanity, or the good of the common welfare, as the phrase goes. But the behavior that comes with it shows that that's not exactly true. While that might be the Western view of the gift, the traditional or classical view of the gift in Western Europe, that maybe informs our concept of the gift. The federal government actually doesn't seem to view it that way in practice, despite the fact that they might mouth the expectations of their populace, that the populace sees it in this way. So we'll say it's in the, we give gifts, grants, aid, whatnot, in this way. That's not necessarily what they really do in practice. So you'll see that federal monies are then cut off if the recipient doesn't enact certain policies. That might be standardized testing in schools that receive grants, or certain admissions policies dictated by the Department of Education. They'll find their grants are suddenly dependent on those. For foreign governments, it might be that they have to comply with demands that they enter into negotiations with a diplomatic partner of the United States. So as a way of extending alliances and trying to control the diplomatic relations between nations. So it's apparently even Western institutions don't necessarily hold to the Western view of the gift. All right, another one, and this one's a historical one, but it's the one he opens with in his narrative of the views of the gift. And this one is the Nez Perce, which are Plains Indians. I'm sure you'll remember. So the question you have to ask when viewing gifts from this angle, and this is how he approaches the Nez Perce gift-giving traditions, when he talks about them anyway. Can gifts have political implications or effects that go beyond the people exchanging gifts? Yes?
Yes.
Kind of telegraphed that one. Yes, yes, of course they did. In this case, the chiefs would exchange small gifts, things portable and that can be taken away from the meeting place, but with the expectation of continued formal gift exchanges over time. The whole point here was to cement a relationship, and that's a political relationship, leader to leader, that would affect their groups on the whole. So they would exchange these simple gifts, and just before they parted ways, when they first made their initial overtures, just before they parted ways, they would exchange these gifts. And the whole point was to establish a measure of trust and reciprocal obligation between those leaders. It was a test, in a way. It was a test to see if the other leader was actually trustworthy and would actually follow through on these reciprocal obligations over time. They would actually exchange and respect one another and go along with the expected tradition of exchanging these gifts. So rather than being out of affection for one another, they were really kind of testing each other and feeling each other out as to whether they were responsible fellow leaders with whom they could deal diplomatically and politically. All right, we're going back to the Trobriand Islands, and this is the one that the writer, the second article I had you read, focused on mostly, and that was the Kula cult, or the exchange of the Kula jewelry. Very famous example, and you'll see it again, you've possibly seen it before. In this case, there was a maintenance of long-distance diffuse networks by the exchange, at least the focus here was on the exchange of these jewelry items with this long history associated with them and these reputations that these pieces of jewelry had. And in this, again, we're going back to the Pacific, and it seems to be, whenever you go back to the Pacific, suddenly people start giving you functionalist explanations of things. So we'll play along here. What did this gift exchange tradition do for the islanders? what function did it serve in their culture, besides just the fact that they were exchanging gifts? What would it do for their overall?
Provided a network to reach out in case one tribe was running low on supplies. They can reach out and have others assist them.
Yes, I mean, that was the explanation a lot of people gave. There were basically two types of things that moved in these networks. One were kula items, which were things of significance, fame, things for which you gained reputation, or your island gained reputation. But also there were the things they referred to as ginwala, which were more mundane things, staples, some subsistence items. Things that you would need to survive, but were usually produced in such surplus that, for example, in the case of the sweet potatoes, would just be left rotting in the fields. But that wasn't always the case. There would be cases where people were running short on food because of some disaster or another, maybe a crop failure, maybe very bad fishing, who knows. So while these channels of gift giving had definitely impact in terms of reputation and fame, as I said, they also kept these networks open. Even when it was not actually necessary to move ginwala goods in those networks, it kept the networks in existence. And in a way, it was sort of a form of insurance. At least that's how our author approaches it. It was a form of insurance for them. All right, and we're going to finish our tour of the various cultures that we looked at in the readings with the Kung, and we're getting here to actually a radically different view of gifts. Up until now, while some of them were tests and some of them were almost like bribes, at the same time, they were all at least viewed as something positive. But what was different about the Kung view of a gift?
It was viewed negatively.
Well, negatively in what way?
They saw it as manipulation.
Yes, they saw it as having a very strong potential for manipulation and obligations back to the person who gave you the gift. So they would worry about indebtedness, and they would also have a tradition of deprecating, or that is downplaying the value of the gift, saying that maybe the cow that they were given was kind of skinny and there wasn't much meat on it, but it'll do, that's okay. Or that when they were going to redistribute food from a hunt, that they, even if they caught an amazing amount of food and everybody was going to be eating like kings that night, didn't matter. They would always say that the food was awful, maybe didn't taste good, but at the very least, there just wasn't enough of it. And the point here is they always viewed gifts, or they viewed gifts as always having the potential to be calculated to indebt them, to obligate them to the other person. And that was a threat. And that's the reason why they had this established, culturally established and mediated response to any attempt to give them a gift. In fact, the response was, in many ways, almost formalized and obligatory. They were almost obliged to downplay the value of the gift to them. All right, we're going to look at a little video here. And this is yet another gift-giving system. This is the Malinese Dama, which is a gift exchange network in Mali.
Look.
We'll have to sit through a small ad to get to it.
Reimagine. Because right here, right now, it's time to... FDA-approved treatment for the temporary improvement of both moderate to severe
Can you see
problems
it?
and crow's feet.
Yes.
Each individual person has been created to love and to be loved.
I'll put that in the
one of the most cash-poor nations in the world, Mali is rich in many ways. Solidarity, generosity, and care and attention to the whole society, not just one's immediate self and family. Dhamma is a gift economy, which sustains community and culture, dignity and values. It is mostly propagated through a strong, though informal, women's social network. It includes most everything: a meal for a hungry neighbor, change for bus fare, a bracelet, all the needs of a woman in her first 40 days after childbirth, sharing the harvest from the fields, or bathing the offspring of another who is off selling at the market. Dhamma is not based on exchange or equivalence between giver and receiver. Instead, the receiver passes the gift on to someone else. Gift giving holds the expectation that just as you provide for others, someone else altogether will care for you or your family. Never just a material object or service, gifts are a pillar of social connections, connecting members directly and indirectly. Passed back and forth, gifts spin webs of relationship and community. Dhamma sustains and celebrates the value of sharing and is a reflection of what Malians term humanness. Reserved for generosity. The social pressure towards constant giving discourages people from hoarding for themselves and so reduces disparity. Malians understand that community is only as strong as its parts. So only by all providing for each other will all survive and thrive. When it works properly, goods circulating in the gift economy can sustain everyone. Dhamma serves as a social safety net that the state has neglected, such as a working healthcare system, social security for the elders, education, and childcare. Given the damage that the global economy is enacting on all life, the continued strength of the gift economy is imperative for human and cultural survival. The large-scale solidarity and gift economy in Mali continues to resist the market economy as it celebrates the value of life and interdependence, putting human relationships over profit.
All right, some questions on that. So that was the Dhamma. Who administrates this gift-giving network?
The women.
Right, right. So, is there an expectation of personal direct reciprocation immediately between these members?
No.
Or even at all?
No.
No.
How is the reciprocation carried out?
It's basically like the current version of paying it forward. Instead of giving it back to the person who gave you something, you pass it on to someone else, and it eventually will go back to the original gift giver.
Exactly. It's not actually a person-to-person reciprocation. It's a larger chain, if you will. And next week we'll get into more about the different types of reciprocation. In fact, there are 3 types in particular we're going to cover, with some variations. But it's something to remember for next week. You're going to see this again. So what examples were in this explanation of the Malinese Dhamma, of this existing actually side by side with the market economy?
Whenever one of the women went to the market, the other one would, another person would stay and help take care of the kids, or.
Yeah, exactly. So at least in this case, despite what one of our authors would have had us believe, actually these sort of gift-giving networks and reciprocal networks actually can exist side by side with the market economy. They don't necessarily disappear. They might split duties, or, for example, the gifting network might become something associated with women, and the marketplace might be something that becomes associated with men. Just one way that it could be divided. It could go many different ways, but they don't necessarily rule out the existence of one another. And that's basically me asking a question which I actually just answered, that these can exist side by side. So I'm sorry I jumped the gun on that question. They are not really mutually exclusive. So, a recap. Hopefully you'll have a broadened view of the institutions, and I deliberately use the plural here, of gift giving because they're not all the same. Obviously, I made a stark contrast between the Western view of the gift and perhaps some other views of the gift, but even within the other views of the gift, there were some radical deviations, all of them culturally mediated and defined. You should at least be able to discuss, and hopefully our exercise, as long as it was, gave us a good way to compare and contrast 2 different gift-giving systems from different cultures. And finally, you would hopefully see, especially from Kronk's example, that our own view of the gift necessarily, in some cases, isn't even the way we behave. There's a lot of variation inside of a culture. Cultures are not these monolithic things with a single orthodoxy, and that is the way everyone sees something, and it's the way it always goes, and the way they always behave and see things. So, as I sort of gave you an indication, we're going to go directly into reciprocity, which some of you might have already read a little of in these works and seen some of these videos. There's 2 things I want you to ask each other, and these both come from the video on Milbank. So, one of his arguments is that reciprocity is totally innate to human beings. It is something that we're hardwired to do, and therefore it's a universal. It's a true human universal. Consider that as you read this next group of readings, and ask yourself, essentially, is that true, or are there counterexamples given? Just think about that, because you're probably going to be asking questions about it. Also ask yourself, based on the new readings, how convincing is Milbank's assertion that movements to end reciprocal relationships, Western movements that is, to end reciprocal relationships, are inherently dehumanizing because they break this universal human urge, or they try to suppress it or manipulate it or just destroy it. And with that in mind, I hope you enjoyed yourselves. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the forums on Blackboard, and certainly look for the next set of readings and the chapters in the book, as well as links to some YouTube videos, at least 2, that'll be due after the weekend, that is next week. Thank you very much.